I actually wanted to talk about data analysis and how it's really never done. And I think that this is somewhat of a myth that is taught, and the way that it's actually displayed within, displayed within research culture or within popular culture even, is that there's like a definitive answer. And that definitive answer is very clear because you did data analysis and you did everything right. What you realize when you do data analysis is that there's always more layers to the onion. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you do it in a superficial way, you'll often get a certain answer. And that certain answer is usually the thing that you hopefully wanted to find. And then you just go with that. But for anybody that knows data, that's used it, real data, real world data, as you realize it's extremely complicated and extremely messy and dirty. And there's always exceptions to the rule. And the exceptions are the things that are actually interesting. That's the stuff that matters. That's the stuff that you have to think about. And actually, the challenge is figuring out how to display it or think about how you communicate what's actually going on. And if you do real data analysis, the outside world really wants to know what the definitive answer actually is. And in general, if you understand data, your answer should be like, I don't really know. It's actually quite uncertain. It's not as clear as one would hope. And that should be the answer for all data analysis. That means that you've actually understood that there's all sorts of exceptions and there's not a clear answer almost always within the data. And it doesn't matter how much data you have. You can have an unbelievable amounts of data, which is actually usually more difficult. I work with millions of observations in the data that I look at. And to synthesize it, to make sense of it, you often have to make all sorts of assumptions. And these assumptions, if you were to write it down, it would be a book in any data analysis. And so the problem is you can't necessarily communicate that to the outside world. You can't communicate all of that information. They're not going to pay attention to it, and they're going to discredit it and all sorts of different stuff. And so what you have to do is think about how you're going to present it and think about the style in which you're presenting information so that other people can see this. One of my mentors told me that it's not necessarily that you're showing everything, but you're giving the story. Imagine you going in a windy road and there's all sorts of detours. You're trying to figure things out and you find all these mistakes. You take, if you're imagining yourself in a maze, you do all sorts of zigzags. But really what the outside world wants is that as the crow flies, straight through the maze or straight over top of the maze to get to where the actual answer is. And I think, for me, I struggle with that in terms of the truthfulness of what data actually is and what you're trying to communicate, and as well as the story that the outside world actually wants. I actually would prefer to have far messier, far more complicated description with all data analysis, but you can't do that. And the reason is that most people don't understand what's happening, and people will get lost, and they'll do the sort of typical things that everybody will sort of raise issues with, and you'll never get your message out. So it's figuring out how do you communicate this particular message that you have with the data analysis and show that it's somewhat credible, that you've tried to do your best, even though it's far more complicated than one would ever hope. So I just want to let everybody know that if you are doing any sort of data analysis, realize that you have to do a lot of deep digging. And even still, when you do the deep digging, it's never ending. It never stops. There's always exceptions. And you'll always find problems with what you're doing. So you have to do a certain amount of deep digging. But then after that, realize that you can't keep doing this. And you have to put boundaries on the extent of what that deep digging is and just move on, knowing that there's quite possibly, things that you never thought about and challenges that are around the corner and perhaps you can revisit sometime in the future. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.